In our first lecture, we discussed 5 core principles of effective vocabulary learning, starting with clear definitions, putting words in rich context, making connections between known concepts and new words, exploring the morphology and etymology of the word, and chunking words by meaning so we have an organized mental lexicon that enables us to find the word we want when we want it. Today, we'll delve a bit deeper into English's morphological system, exploring one of the big secrets of vocabulary learning. While our focus will be on how words work, we'll also be learning some marvelous words along the way. Now, in Lecture 1, we discussed how our minds organize information, including words, by schema or mental file folders. Traditional one word at a time vocabulary instruction, the approach many of us experienced in high school, leads to cramming tons of words haphazardly into our mental junk drawers, because we don't have mental file folders to store our vocabulary. When we cram words, we may remember them for the Friday quiz, but we'd be hard-pressed to find and use the vocabulary when we really need them, weeks, months, or years from now. Sound familiar to you? Did you ever cram for a test or exam in high school or college? Did you remember the information years later? We can avoid the pitfalls of this mental junk drawer trap by organizing our vocabulary learning by meaning and general concept. For example, by creating a mental file folder where we can put words associated with good and evil, another mental file folder where we can store words about liars, cheats, and swindlers, and so on. This is why I've organized the course by concept, rather than just organizing words like ballyhoo and bedlam, because they happen to start with the letter B. When we organize words this way, by meaning, we capitalize on how our minds tend to organize information. So, we now know how our minds organize language, but how does our language organize words? Does the English language have a secret system, a code we've not been privy to? To get at these big questions, let's start with a couple of smaller, more focused questions that I'm commonly asked. First, how many words are there in the English language? And second, of this total corpus of words in the English language, how many does the average high school or college graduate know? So looking at that first question, what do you think? How many words are there in the English language? Do you think there are 6,000 words? 60,000 words? 600,000 words? Or 6 million words? Like it or not, there's no easy answer to this, and much of it depends on what your definition of a word is and what types of words you decide to include. For example, should respect, respected, respectful, and respectfully be counted as 4 words or 1 word? For the purposes of this lecture, I'm going to go with a number of definitions included in what most consider the authoritative dictionary in the English language, the Oxford English Dictionary. The OED second edition includes over 600,000 definitions. Now, most of us know only a portion of these words, and by know, I mean we understand the meanings of these words if we encountered them in a book, newspaper, or magazine. Understanding words. This is your receptive vocabulary. And most of us feel comfortable using an even smaller portion in speech or writing. This is your expressive vocabulary. So by this definition, what do you think the average receptive vocabulary of a high school graduate is? A college graduate. A classic study by researchers William E. Nagy and Richard C. Anderson estimates that the average high school student knows between 25 and 50,000 words. And language expert David Crystal estimates that the average college graduate knows approximately 75,000 words. Now, compared to 600,000 total words, a 75,000 word vocabulary may seem small, but actually it's a pretty impressive number. And if you think about it, there's no way you can obtain a 75,000 word vocabulary through direct instruction, 1 word at a time. We don't learn words one at a time like beads on a string. This is why traditional word-by-word approaches to learning vocabulary aren't the most effective. So, how do people build great vocabularies? Well, first and foremost, we acquire a deep, broad, and flexible vocabulary through wide reading. Think about the people you know who possess excellent vocabularies. They're probably also the most avid readers you know. As adults, we pick up the significant majority of new vocabulary incidentally through meaningful reading in connected text, and environmentally from listening, discussing, and using words in meaningful contexts. Does this mean that we should just give up on studying vocabulary directly, hoping to improve through reading alone? Absolutely not. But it does mean that if we're serious about improving our vocabulary, in addition to wide reading, we need to be strategic and thoughtful about how we study vocabulary, making the best use of our limited time to receive the biggest payoff in learning. And this is where the 5 principles we discussed last time come in. They help us get the biggest bang for our buck when we study vocabulary. And I'm going to facilitate your learning by organizing the words in this course by general concept and meaning. In other words, I'm going to employ the schema approach we've already discussed. But in addition to this, wouldn't it be wonderful if our language already organized words that same way, by meaning? If this was the case, our minds and our language could work hand in hand. Now, at first glance, this doesn't appear to be the case. Most of the tools we use to learn about words are organized alphabetically. Think of dictionaries and encyclopedias, right? However, I'm going to argue that our language, and in particular the vocabulary of our language, is organized by meaning, if you know how to look for it. There's a secret to learning vocabulary, a method that can be much more effective than the traditional word-by-word approach to vocabulary instruction that many of us experienced in school. Actually, I've already alluded to this secret in Lecture 1, so let me state it very plainly right now. English has a built-in system of meaning, or morphology, that is largely based on the classic Greek and Latin origins of our language. Those who know how to harness this morphological system are at a great advantage not only when it comes to learning more words, but also when it comes to storing them more solidly in your mental lexicon. And the good news is that you don't have to be a Latin or Greek scholar to capitalize on this morphological system. In fact, one of the reasons this system is so powerful is that it builds on words that you already know, as I'll show you shortly. So just how powerful is this system of morphology? Is it worth spending our time examining Latin and Greek roots in this course? Specifically, what percentage of English vocabulary is based on Latin or Greek prefixes, suffixes, or roots? What do you think? 20%? 40%? Do I hear 50%? Higher? What do you think? The eye-opening answer is that approximately 70% of English vocabulary is derived from Latin or Greek affixes or roots. 70%! Now, do you think the vocabulary of science and technology is higher or lower than this 70%? If you said higher, you're right. Over 90% of our scientific vocabulary is created by a combination of Greek and Latin morphemes. Think of medical terms like arthritis, bronchitis, conjunctivitis, all of which include the Greek suffix itis. And think of other fields like law and the multitude of associated legal terms such as habeas corpus and amicus curiae. Think of how many vocabulary terms, concepts, and expressions in disciplines and fields like these come from Greek and Latin. So, if 70% of our language and approximately 90% of our scientific language is based on a particular system of morphology, doesn't it make sense to learn about this system? Put another way, what makes more sense, studying 75,000 separate words, one word at a time, or learning the system that underlies the vast majority of these words? One of the keys to unlocking this morphological system is a concept known as the spelling-meaning connection. a term coined and examined by vocabulary researcher Shane Templeton. Now, as we discuss the spelling-meaning connection, you're going to see that our spelling system, also known as orthography, makes a lot more sense than you may have originally thought. Now, to show you how this works, let me invite you to spell the word health. My health is good. Health. How is it spelled? H-E-A-L-T-H. Have you ever wondered why the word health is spelled with a silent A? Why don't we just spell it as it sounds phonetically as H-E-L-T-H? In fact, that silent A is there for a very good reason. If you take the TH off the end of health, what word are you left with? That's right, heal. You can see now why it makes sense to keep the spelling of health with an A, to visually clue us into the fact that health is directly related to, in the meaning, to heal, healer, healthy, unhealthy, and the list goes on. Thus, the spelling-meaning connection states, words that are related in spelling are often related in meaning, despite changes in sound. That's the spelling-meaning connection. And there are many other word pairs that illustrate the spelling-meaning connection in English. They show you why it makes sense to keep the silent letters in many of our spellings. Here are some examples of silent-sounded consonant pairs in English. And by the way, these are fun questions to ask a neighbor you want to impress at your next get-together. Have you ever wondered about that silent N in the word column? A column is written by who? A columnist. How about the silent N in hymn? Where can you find a hymn? In a hymnal. And what about the silent B in crumb? You get a crumb when you crumble a cookie. These silent letters are a direct visual clue that these words are related in meaning and came from the same root word. If we decided to delete these silent letters and only spell words by sound, we would lose this important spelling-meaning connection that's built into English's DNA. Now, how about the word resign? I want to resign from my job. Resign. R-E-S-I-G-N. What related word is the silent G sounded in? Well, when you resign, you must turn in your resignation. And let's think of 10 other words that are related in spelling and meaning to resign. Resignation, resign, sign, insignia, design, designation, signal, significant, insignificant, signature, and signatory. Wow. In fact, all these words are derived from the Latin root signum, which means a symbol or mark. They all share a common core meaning related to a common spelling. You can see how powerful this system can be. Those of us who take this morphological approach to teaching words, we like to say, when you learn one word, you actually learn 10. This is because one single root like signum can be the key to unlocking the meanings of many other words that are derived from that root. Your knowledge of just a relatively small number of roots can exponentially increase your vocabulary. In terms of morphological knowledge, a little goes a long way. So you can begin to see why Noam Chomsky, one of the great linguists of our time, proposed that English spelling, or what linguists term orthography, is a near optimal system for representing words. Many critics of our spelling system don't get this. Our spelling system didn't evolve simply to represent sound. Spelling evolved to also represent meaning. This is why word nerds like me love our spelling system the way it is. So don't change it. Knowing a little bit about spelling can actually improve your vocabulary knowledge. So in essence, what we're seeing is that language organizes words by morphology. And if we appreciate that fact, we can use morphology as a powerful tool to improve our vocabulary. To illustrate this further, let's return to a word we explored in Lecture 1, factotum. Do you remember what a factotum is? How do we break the word down in order to understand its meaning? If you remember, we analyzed factotum into two morphemes, FAC and totum. FAC is from the Latin word facio, which means to do or make. You may remember this because I connected it to a keyword, factory, with the Latin root FAC. A factory is a place that makes things. And by the way, for every target root in this course, I'll be providing you with a keyword to unlock its meaning. Keywords are important. You'll also recall that the Latin word totum means all. So a factotum is someone who does everything, a jack of all trades. Now you may be thinking, that's great, Kevin, but how can that help me learn other words? This is where the power of the spelling-meaning connection comes into play. How many other English words contain this root, FAC, besides factotum? Let me give you a few. First, we'll analyze some FAC words you already know well. Then we'll move on to some less familiar ones. Okay, fact. A fact is something that's true. Now, how is that related to making or doing, the core meaning of the FAC root? Well, fact is derived from the Latin factum, meaning thing done. If something was done, it actually happened, and therefore, it's true. It's a fact. Manufacture. The M-A-N-U in manufacture is the Latin word for hand, as in the phrase manual labor. So something that is manufactured is literally made by hand, not something found in nature. You can see how fact and manufacture share the same core meaning of do or make. Here are a few more FAC words to give you a sense of how productive this root is. Factor, facsimile, benefactor, artifact, and facilitate. All these words derive from one single root, and I could go on. That's a pretty productive root. And now let's look at one FAC word you may not be as familiar with, factitious. What do you think factitious means? Do you think factitious means A, without any facts or substantial evidence to back up a false claim or argument? Or B, artificial rather than natural, not genuine, a sham, contrived? Before I tell you the definition, let me tell you my factitious story. I love to laugh and tell jokes. I love to laugh at other people's jokes. But if someone else's joke or story is not funny, if it falls flat, I still feel obliged to laugh. I don't want to make that person feel bad. I guess I'm just kind of a pushover and a softie in that way. However, my own children tell me they can see right through me. They say I've got two laughs, my real laugh and my fake laugh. I've got a real, genuine witch-like cackle when I really think something spit out your coffee hilarious, and a factitious laugh when I want to laugh at someone's bad joke to make them feel better, a pity laugh. They can tell my factitious pity laugh because I smile slightly, nod my head, and sort of chuckle. Not only can my kids see right through my factitious laugh, but my daughter Grace loves to mimic it. So, after having heard this story, do you think factitious means A, without any facts to back up a false claim? Or B, artificial rather than natural, not genuine? If you said B, you were right. Now let's apply 4 of the 5 principles we learned about last time, starting with a definition. Factitious, an adjective, has 2 related definitions. It means 1, made or manufactured, not natural. So, a flower made out of plastic would be a factitious flower. Or 2, made up in the sense of contrived, a sham, fake, or phony, like my fake laugh. Okay, now that we have a definition, let's put factitious in context. The CIA agent hid his message inside the hollow, factitious rock by the bridge. His handler would pick up the message a few hours later. My dad's factitious smile didn't fool anyone. He was definitely not happy to see our cousins, who showed up, once again unannounced. Now let's make a connection. Connect the word factitious to something in your own personal experience that is artificial, not natural, not genuine, a sham. Perhaps you own a fake diamond. You have a factitious diamond. Or perhaps you're put in a situation where you felt obliged to put on a factitious smile or laugh. Now, factitious can be a little tricky to remember because it has the word fact in it, and you might think it means true. But remember, exploring the etymology and the morphology of a word, its history and its structure, is often our best tool for making those word meanings stick. So, let's take the root back to the root to help us remember factitious. Now, as we just discussed, the root in factitious is the Latin root fac, meaning make. Remember that our key word for fac is a factory. What does a factory do? It makes things. And here's the important part for this word: things that are made by humans are not natural. So when you think of factitious, think of factories making artificial things, things that are not natural. Also think of my fake, factitious laugh. Okay, we have a usage alert, usage alert. Throughout these lectures, I'll be giving you usage alerts when I want to make a point about a commonly misused or misunderstood word, or about two words that are confused. Factitious is sometimes confused with facetious, but facetious means not serious, as in something intended to be humorous or amusing, such as a frivolous remark or person. Now, I hope this discussion has demonstrated the power of a morphological approach to vocabulary learning, how one single root like fac can be the key to unlocking and generating the meanings of scores of derived words. As I said before, with morphological knowledge, a little goes a long way. Now, these two lectures have focused on learning how to learn vocabulary. While we've explored some wonderful word meanings, such as Procrustean, factotum, and factitious, we've primarily focused on important vocabulary learning principles and concepts as the tools in our vocabulary strategies toolbox that we'll use for the rest of this course. From here on out, we're going to pick up the pace in terms of learning specific words. We're going to cover approximately 8 to 10 target words per lecture, with a lot of bonus words thrown in that I'll mention, but not discuss as deeply as the target words. To keep this cornucopia of vocabulary organized, I strongly advise you to create a vocabulary notebook or a vocabulary file on your computer or tablet. Organize this notebook along the same lines as our lectures, by general concept and topic. So, you might have a section for words having to do with pride and humility, in which you'd include words like bumptious, supercilious, and fawning. You also might want to add a separate section on affixes and roots. Or, you might want to include the affixes and roots with the topics as we discuss them. Do whatever works best for you. For each word in your notebook, use our vocabulary learning principles. Include a clear definition and write the word in a rich contextual sentence so you know what it means. Make a personal connection to the word. If the word describes a person you know or relates to an experience you've had, write that person's name down as an example, or jot down the experience. Draw a picture of the word if that helps. Pictures can be incredibly powerful memory tools. Don't worry if you're not artistic, I'm not. Stick figures and rudimentary sketches will do. As long as you can tell what the image is, it will help you remember the word. Also, as you enter words into your notebook, include notes on the morphology and etymology of the words as I discuss them in the lectures. Remember, your knowledge of the roots from which the words are derived can be your shortcut back to the word meaning. A root can serve as your hook to help you remember a word for the long haul, 10 days, 10 months, and even 10 years from now. You can organize your vocabulary notebook into the traditional Cornell 2-column note system. Make the left column narrow and the right column wide. Write the target vocabulary word in the narrow left column. You want a wide right column because this is where you write all the information you want about that word. Definitions, personal connections, pictures, morphology, whatever helps you own that word. With the vocabulary notebook, don't worry about perfection. The process is just as important as the product. Because you're actively engaged in working with the words, you'll learn them. So during the lectures, I'll be making reference to the vocabulary notebook, giving you tips and ideas of what you might want to include for various words. Also, as you continue to learn and collect words on your own after you finish this course, you can include them in the notebook and add new topical sections. Think of this vocabulary notebook as your own repository of powerful words that you can draw on when you need. Now, to wrap up our introduction to learning principles and concepts, I'd like to end this lecture with Morphology 101. Don't worry, you don't have to have a PhD in linguistics to learn vocabulary effectively, but it will be helpful to know some important morphological terms that I'll be using throughout this course. Base words, roots, prefixes, suffixes, and affixes. These terms will be our vocabulary for learning vocabulary. Let's start with a simple word, unprofitable. Now, a base word is a word that can stand on its own. In the word unprofitable, the base word is profit. It can stand alone, and when it does so, profit just means monetary gain. A prefix is a morpheme or unit of meaning that can be attached to the beginning of a base word or root. The prefix in unprofitable is un, meaning not. A suffix is a morpheme or unit of meaning that can be attached to the end of a base word or root. The suffix in unprofitable is able, meaning capable of. So, if you put the prefix un, the base word profit, and the suffix able together, you get unprofitable, which means not capable of making a monetary gain. Now, affix is the umbrella term for prefixes and suffixes. So, when you hear me say affix in this course, you'll know I'm talking about prefixes and suffixes collectively. What about roots? Well, roots are morphemes that cannot stand alone, but to which prefixes and suffixes can attach. We've already worked extensively with one root, FAC. And another example is the Latin root spect, meaning look or see. Spect isn't a standalone English word, but it's an incredibly fertile root. Now, you may have heard the term root word before, but I don't like this term. We'll use the term roots and not root words in this course because, as one of my students asked me, why are we calling these root words if they're not really words that can stand alone? Now, my key word for the root spect is spectacles. What do spectacles do? They help you see or look at things. And what's the job of an inspector? She looks into things. What does a spectator do? He looks at things. Listen to these other words derived from spect, all having to do with looking. Speculate, to look ahead. Retrospect, to look back. And introspect, to look in. Looking at roots in this way can be a lot of fun. I remember exploring the spect root with a group of middle school students. Now, we live about 30 miles outside of Philadelphia, and one of the students had gone to the Spectrum, the stadium where the Philadelphia 76ers used to play basketball. When she realized that the word spectrum contained the root spect, she became ecstatic, shouting, "Oh my God, I was a spectator at the Spectrum! I was a spectator at the Spectrum!" To which a quick-witted boy in the group replied, "Were you wearing your spectacles?" Let's finish today with a less familiar spect word, circumspect. So what do you think circumspect means? Well, circumspect means cautious, prudent, and it's another word like factotum that I had to look up multiple times in college until I got smart and looked up the word's morphology, and I've remembered it ever since. We know that spect means look, but what does circum mean? Well, what other words do you know that contain circum? How about circumference and circumnavigate? Circum means around. So the two roots in circumspect mean look around. But how does look around relate to the meaning of circumspect, cautious and prudent? Well, you tell me. What does a cautious, wary person do before she acts? She looks around to make sure everything's copacetic. So, when you think of circumspect, Think of a cautious person looking around, cautious of her surroundings. What a great visual to help us remember this word, a visual that we get from a little morphological knowledge. As I noted earlier, we spent these first 2 lectures laying a solid methodological foundation. That is, we focused on how to learn vocabulary effectively. Now, it's time to start building our vocabulary in earnest. I'll see you next time.